All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Thank you for joining me today for our webinar on Knowify's advanced settings. This is the next webinar in a series about how Knowify can help you run your business remotely. And we'll also be having a webinar next Monday, the 20th, on our new release. So just covering some of the exciting features that we just released this past weekend. And also, if you'd like to learn about something, whether it's a topic or a feature or an idea, we'd love to hear from you. Please submit any feedback on things that you're interested in learning. You can do so in the chat or through our support team. And we're creating these ideas for webinars based on your feedback with the time that we have. So just a quick intro. I'm Vin. I'm a product expert here at Knowify. I assist the product team with running Knowify and our user experience. Today, I will be covering mainly around user access. So walking through what the different permissions are, covering what each user is able to do and see within the account. This is part of what's available to everybody when you use Knowify and add new users and edit their access. I'll also walk through some of the advanced permissions. And this is a feature that's included in our enterprise tier. And it gives some additional parameters to help restrict access to the account. Just giving you more detail on what users are able to see and do within the account. I'll show you an example of a couple examples of what the users will see on their side. So how we can customize Knowify so that when everybody logs in, they're only able to access and manage the things that they have permission to. And I'll also quickly cover the hiding closed jobs. So we can, in our settings, be able to control which jobs show up when we're logging time and purchases so that we can help organize that way. For example, jobs that are done and closed or jobs that are just in the bidding process, we can hide those so that only the active jobs show up when we're allocating cost. And I'll also have some time at the end for Q&A. So you can submit in the text chat any questions that you have. And at the end of the session, we'll leave some time to go through them. All right, so at this point, we should be able to see my screen, and I have our Knowify account up. This is our dashboard, and this is what is the high-level view visible to administrative users. I'll show you some more about how we can restrict access to what's here if we don't want to show profitability or progress to different users depending on their access. Now, all of the settings in the account, they're going to take place here in the admin section located at the top right. From here, I'll go into the users tab, and this is where you're able to add new users and edit their permissions. So when I add a new user, the first choice is the type of access. And just want to give you a quick definition of each of these. A regular access is a full access user to Knowify. They're going to be able to access Knowify from both the computer and our smartphone application. And that's mainly what I'll be focusing on today is the different permissions associated with this type of user, because they're actually able to log into Knowify from the computer. So we want to control what they're able to do within the account. The next is the mobile only access to Knowify. And these users are only going to be able to log in on our smartphone application. This is essentially designed as a technician's tool, so it's a much more compact version of Knowify. And it's specifically designed so that they could log in and log their time, log any purchases related to jobs. They can also upload notes and pictures, but it doesn't allow them to create jobs or view financial information. It's just a tool for field workers to be able to keep track of their work. And then on the office side, we can access this information. Mobile access is also available to subcontractors. So if you have users set up in here or vendors that are marked as subs, you can give them access so that they can log their time and purchases. This is obviously optional, and the extent of their access is just to the mobile application. The last type of user is a user with no access to Knowify. And this is essentially means just what it says here. They're not able to log into the account. I can add users like this so that I can budget their time, budget their cost on the job, I can also log their hours or have a foreman log their time, but they're essentially not accessing the account in any way. Now I'll start here with the mobile access to Knowify user. And you'll see that the permissions, there doesn't really give them much here because the smartphone app is essentially very similar to most users where they're able to come in and log their hours and purchases and notes. So they can enable this tracks their time feature. And this is, I would say more times than not is what is enabled so that they can actually log their hours. It gives them access to a time card section so they can review the time that they've submitted. And they can check in and check out of any of the jobs they're scheduled on. The additional permission here is the foreman access. And what this does is it gives them the ability to log time for other employees. So for example, a very common use is if I have users set up as non-access and they're part of a crew, and I have a foreman that logs time and manages them, I can create this user as a mobile user and enable foreman access. And that user is going to be able to log their time and also the time of any employees working with them. And we'll switch to the full access to Knowify, where you'll see that there's a lot more features that we can enable for each user. Because essentially it gives them access to a bigger version of Knowify. We have the Office login here. So at that point, we can control what they are and are not able to do within the account. So I'll start up here with the rates and job financials permission. And what this does is when enabled, it allows them to have access to other features in the account like invoicing and contracts, because they're going to need to be able to obviously see the job financials in order to perform those tasks. This will also let them view the employee's rates. So this is also a common permission set for users that are going to be approving time for other employees. This will give them access to the review time section where they can view all the time entries, the amount of hours, and the total cost of the entry. So we want to make sure that they have access to the job financials because they will be able to calculate the employee's rates based on that information. Now this permission is one of a few here that automatically gets locked in when we enable other permissions. For example, I have the manages bills and invoicing permission here. And what this does is when they're enabled, it opens up the modules for the user to be able to create vendor invoices and also invoices to the customers. So in order for me to give access to a user to invoice clients, it'll automatically lock in the job financials since they'll need to be able to have some access to the revenue side of the job. The vendor bills is factored into the cost. So this will allow us to create a bill for a vendor and factor into the total materials cost on the job or subcontractor cost. The next permission here is the QuickBooks or accountant permission. And just want to clarify, by enabling this permission, it doesn't give the user access to your QuickBooks account. What this does is it opens up the accountant section in Knowify. And this is essentially the place where a user is able to come in and view a log of everything that syncs back and forth to QuickBooks. And they're also able to assign the default accounts. So for example, with this permission enabled, this gives access to this QuickBooks tab here, located under More. And this will let them see everything that syncs back and forth between Knowify and QuickBooks. They can see if there are any sync errors, where the actual entity originated from. And at the top, they'll have these default sections. So they can select from the chart of accounts in QuickBooks, and we can tell Knowify where in QuickBooks we want this information to sync to. They can do this for vendors and expenses, income and customers. They can also set classes to their jobs and the location if you use these features in QuickBooks. And they can also set the income and expense account for each catalog item. So that permission basically just gives them access to this section here. They're not necessarily accessing QuickBooks, but more so just controlling what's going to QuickBooks and where in QuickBooks it's going. So back in my user section here, we cover these permissions. And the next two are the time, which we covered with mobile. The difference with the full access user, they have a little bit more in the way of features when it comes to tracking time. For example, they'll be able to enter a timesheet for an employee. So they can choose the employee, log the amount of hours against each job on a weekly basis. They can also view the check-in and out view. So they can see exactly where and when employees were checking in and out of jobs. They get the timestamp, they can view the user and more information about the location. So it's more expanded version of time tracking, but it's essentially the same where they're able to either track their time or the time of others. Now, the next feature here manages or estimates jobs. This is essentially giving the user the ability to create a new project and also enter in an internal estimate. So they can create jobs and budget hour cost on the job internally. Now, by enabling this, it doesn't lock in anything else because we can give the user the ability to create a job and just not be able to see any of the financials. They'll be able to create a project, enter in the estimated cost, but at that point, the only thing they're able to use from then on and view is the progress based on the amount of hours and the quantity of materials. This doesn't give them the ability to see the revenue, the contract, or any dollar values specifically. That permission is reserved for this manages client agreements. What this will do is it'll give them the ability to create a contract within the job. So any user that has this, it automatically locks them into the job financials and the manages or estimates jobs. Because this permission will actually let them create a bid that they can keep track of when it's either bidding, out for signature, or an active contract. They don't necessarily have to have the invoicing feature. We can let them bid on jobs and send for signature, and then allow someone else to keep track of the invoicing. But they will have to be able to manage jobs in the financials because they will be dealing with dollar values. And in order to create a contract, we'll first have to create a job. The next permission here is the schedules company resources. And what this does is it basically just gives them access to the scheduling section in Knowify. It will give them the ability to set a start and end date for any of the phases associated with jobs. They can also see where employees are working on the schedule and schedule new employees to new jobs. So this will not really be tied into any of the financial information about the job. It'll basically just give them a place where they can see who's working and also ensure that they schedule employees based on the current work cycle. Now, the last two permissions here I want to focus on. They're high-level permissions and really give more access to the account and control over things. The first is the Knowify System Administrator privilege. And what this will do is it opens up this whole admin section here. So anyone that has the admin privilege is able to come in and update the company settings here. There's some of the basics like the name and the address and the company hours. You can also update new users. So they'll be able to add users to the account and update their permissions. They can also update the rates of employees, add equipment, change the company settings, connect to QuickBooks, etc. Basically, it gives them access to this section here. So anybody who's listed as an admin will be able to edit their own permissions and add or edit new users as well. And the last permission set that we have here is the approval authority. Now, what this does is any number that I have in this box, this will make sure that any purchase or bill that exceeds this amount has to get approved by whoever I set here as the direct manager. Anything that's below this amount will automatically be job costed. But this will make us, gives us another layer of security here so that if I have a user that logs a purchase that's exceeding a certain threshold of my choice here, that I can choose a manager that will have to approve that in order for it to be job costed. The unlimited approval authority, it will give them the ability to job cost any purchase of any size. And you'll see that when we cover the advanced features, the advanced permissioning, that this comes into play as well, because it gives them the ability to see things like the catalog prices, and also is another way to bypass some of the additional restrictions that you can put on the permissions. So I want to show an example of how we can tailor Knowify to some of our other users here. Now, for example, as a full access admin, this is what I'll see when I log in. I get my full complement of dashboard in Knowify, where I can see the total value of all jobs. I can see the progress. I can see where everybody is working, how many hours have been submitted, and the open and outstanding bills and invoices. I also have my full arsenal of modules here on the left-hand side, so I can keep track of jobs, time entries, expenses, invoices, scheduling, QuickBooks, and pretty much every additional feature here as well. Now I'll pop back into the user section because we're going to restrict access for this user here. So I can give you an example of how we can ensure that this user is only able to play the role that we've set for them. So a common permission set is setting up so that the user is able to come in, log time, create new jobs, estimate those jobs, and schedule employees on the jobs. But we don't necessarily want this user to be able to create invoices or manage the cost on the job, or be able to access QuickBooks, or ultimately the client agreement and the contract. So I'll just enable the ability for them to track time and track time for others. We'll give them the manages or estimates jobs function, and also the scheduling permission. So I'm going to log in as this user just to give you a better idea of what they will see when they log in. So when they first log in, you'll notice that they don't have access to that dashboard. So right off the bat, they're not able to see the total scope of all the jobs and data that we have in the account. They get taken to this activity feed where they can view notes and actions that were performed on the jobs that they're scheduled on. And they can also view their schedule here, so they can cycle days in advance and see exactly what they have to work on and when. You'll also notice on the left-hand side that it doesn't show the full complement of modules here. This user is able to create jobs, they can log time, they can schedule and log their expenses, but we don't have any invoicing or bills or QuickBooks access. Now within the contract jobs, see that they are able to see projects here, but they're not able to see the running totals that we have in real time. They can't keep track of the revenue, the cost, or the profitability on the job. They're essentially just creating the job, entering the budget, and then they can view the status updates as this job is updated throughout the account. So when we come in to add a new project with this user, they can put in the name, they can select a customer here and choose the type of job that we're working on. And then for the job costing style, if they choose the simple or advanced mode, then their process is essentially finished on this job, because these jobs require that the bid is created first and then tracked afterwards. So they're essentially just creating the jobs, entering the general information, and then handing it off to someone else who has the access to bid on the project. They can, however, choose the professional mode here, and you'll know that this job costing style allows them to create a budget first. So this will give this particular user the option to estimate the amount of labor, materials, and subcontractor work needed for this job. But once they create that estimate, it's available to anyone else with access to view the bid and the costs, but it's essentially that will be the extent of their access within this job. And it would also give them the ability to set some of the general information here. So this is a way for our employees to work together on these projects. You know, I can come in here and create the job and set the bid due date. And this way, the user that I put in charge of creating contracts and managing the bids, they'll be able to see on the calendar when these bids are due. They can see the general information started by my user here, and then they can pick it up from there and complete the rest of the project. So we can make sure that each user has the access that we want them to. So I can get somebody in here to create a job and estimate it. I can have someone else create the bid, send it to the customer, manage the signature, and then I can have somebody actually invoice and keep track of the financials. Now, when they create the project here, it'll prompt to make sure that they're set as a project manager or sales lead if we have this advanced permission turned on. And I'll touch on this in a little bit more detail, but essentially, whenever you create a new job, you're able to choose a project manager and sales lead. And this is used on our additional reports here so that we can keep track of jobs based on who is assigned to them and run reports on that information. We also have an advanced permission that we can restrict access to jobs to users that are only set up as a sales lead or project manager. So for example, my employee Chris here will only be able to see jobs that he is selected as a sales lead or project manager to. That winds up being a very popular feature and use of the advanced permissions so that users are only able to see the jobs that they are assigned to. They're not able to see jobs that others are working on. Now, once they create the job, you'll see that it gives them the access to the plan and track so that they can actually create an estimate for the job, but there's no proposal or contract section because this user does not have access to see the revenue or create client agreements. So that would be required in order for that section to show up. And this is a way for me to ensure that he's not able to see the revenue side of the job, the invoice side of the job, or the progress billing. Now the plan and track section, it'll be similar to the normal plan and track where they can come in now and create job phases and enter in the estimated cost for labor and material. The difference is that the total cost at the top is hidden from this user. So they're not able to come in and see what the running total is on the project. They're not able to compare the actual cost to date against the budget. Their job is to essentially come in here, choose the materials, choose the type of labor that's going to be on the job, and estimate the quantities and hours. And just to give you an example, this is essentially how a job will look once it's in progress to this user. Again, they only see the plan and track section. And then inside here, they're actually able to see progress without dollar amounts. So we're always hiding the total cost values from the user here. It shows nothing at the top, updating it. It will just show progress based on what was initially estimated. They can see how close we are to hitting the budget for labor and materials for each of the phases. Can see the number of hours and the quantity of materials used, but again, no actual pricing here. Now, this is just one of the examples of restricted access that we can give. You can also enable and get a little bit more detailed if maybe we don't want them creating a budget or we want to let them bid but not invoice. You can use those basic settings as a way to determine what they're able to see when they log in and what they're able to access within the account. So I'm going to pop back into the admin user here and just give you a better idea of some of the advanced permissioning that's available with our enterprise feature. This can also be found in the admin section, and we can find this in the customize tab. You'll notice near the middle of the page, we have an advanced permissioning, and this will enable some additional checkboxes that we can turn on or off based on the level of access that we want to give on a whole. For example, you'll see that this is where that unlimited approval authority comes back because we can make sure that anybody who's set up as an admin or who has unlimited approval authority, that these additional restrictions will not apply to them. Regardless of their access, they'll still be able to see the information that we're restricting from other users here. And some of the options that you'll have is to restrict access to cost information, to the profitability on jobs, and also to the dashboard. So we can actually give a user the ability to create contracts and invoice and still be able to hide the cost, profitability, and the dashboard from them. So we can make sure that anyone who we need to have access to create invoices, to budget jobs, to keep track of the progress can do just that without seeing our performance as a company as a whole and our performance on each job. Some of the additional options that you have here are additional features for bills. For example, we can make sure that bills, just like with purchases, are automatically subject to review. So that was similar to our purchase order approval authority, where that amount that's set up with the user, any bills that exceed that amount will have to get approved by their direct manager first. We can also make sure that only the administrator or users with unlimited approval authority will actually be able to record payment on bills that are pending approval. So if I'm a user that does not have a limited approval authority and I create a bill that exceeds my amount, I will not be able to create a payment until I have an admin approve that bill. It just makes sure that that outstanding amount stays where it is unless an admin approves or an admin records a payment manually. And that brings us to the access to project manager and sales lead. And essentially, once this is checked off, anybody who is not set as a sales lead or project manager in those drop downs that I was showing, they'll not be able to see those jobs. And this, again, is very popular so that users are only able to see the jobs they are working on. And it's especially useful when we have project managers that we only want to focus on their jobs, be able to access the information we set for them on those jobs, and not be able to see jobs that I have other project managers working on. So I'll keep these all enabled. I just want to focus on the cost, profitability, and dashboard specifically. And I'll pop back into the user section and show you another example of access here. So I have another user that you'll see, unlike the other example, he has a little bit more that he can actually access within the account. I want this user to be able to create bills, to invoice, and create contracts, in addition to what our user was able to create the budget and jobs and time. So this user is essentially able to do almost anything within the account except access QuickBooks, the accountant section, and they're not an administrator to make those company settings. I also make sure that I do have an approval authority set for this person so that those restrictions that I set in the advanced permissioning, such as the restriction to cost, profitability, and dashboard, will apply to this user. So this is going to let them get a full scope of tracking the job without seeing what we make, without seeing the dashboard of what we make across all jobs, and without seeing the specific cost information like our employees' labor cost, our material expenses, and our subcontractor costs. So I'll log out of my admin here and log into this user. And you'll see that when we first log in, just like our other user, we don't have access to the dashboard. So we have a little bit more in the activity feed because this user is given the ability to view more, such as the actual proposals and bids, but they're not seeing profitability and they're not seeing the dashboard as a whole. On the left-hand side, they're also able to see the jobs and time and purchases, but you'll notice that we're also including the invoices and the bills module here. So with those two permissions to create invoices and vendor invoices, they're actually able to access these sections to manage this data on the job. Now within the contract job section, you'll see that they do have some extra tracking here. They can see the total revenue because they are given access to invoice. They can also see the total contract amount because I did give this user the ability to create these contracts. However, my user is not able to see what the job is costing me, and they're not able to see the profitability on the job. They're just keeping track of the things that I have assigned to them, but those additional permissions are restricting that so that he's only able to see the 5 jobs I've assigned him to. They're not able to see the total profitability on the dashboard or the total scope of each job. So within each project, it'll be similar where they can come in and view plan and track and the progress. This will essentially be the exact same as the other user because we're restricting cost. So they're not seeing the total cost on the job. They're not seeing budgeted cost. They're just seeing progress based on what's been entered against what was budgeted. They do, however, have access to this contract section. And this is where they'll initially be able to create a proposal where they can bid and send for signature to our customers. They can also come in here and view the value of the contract and adjust this by adding change orders, which can also be sent out for signature. And they can come in here and create progress invoices. So we'll be able to show them, what's been billed so far, the total percentage, and let them create new invoices without actually seeing the profitability of the job. So that's the basics on that permission. I just want to briefly show one other thing, the closed jobs and the bidding jobs. Essentially, you'll have a place where you can check off the ability to hide closed and bidding jobs. And what this does is it gives you some more tracking so that you don't have jobs cluttering up a list when you're assigning purchases or time, jobs that are already closed or just in the bidding process. So this can be found here in the admin section. and also under customize. Customize is where you'll be able to tweak the settings in the account, the different features that you want turned on, and also the way you want certain things to work here. So a little bit closer to the bottom, we have hide closed jobs and hide bidding jobs. Now what this does is it will hide the job from a search if it's closed or bidding whenever you're searching either here in the office or on the smartphone app. So a lot of times we see users turn this on so that their employees on the smartphone do not accidentally check into a job that's already closed or to a job that's actually just bidding. And just show you an example of where this comes into play. For example, I'll just create a purchase here. And when I'm selecting the job that I want to point this purchase to, you'll see that I'm able to see all jobs that are currently active. But if I don't have hide closed jobs on, any of my closed projects are going to show up here as inactive. So it still gives me the ability to job cost to these projects, even if they're closed. And that's your preference. You can turn it on so that these jobs are hidden, or you can keep it off so that you can still job cost for these older projects. Additionally, you'll see the bid flag next to jobs that are just in the bidding process. This will show up if we have a draft of a contract, but the job's not active, or if the job is out for signature waiting for the customer to sign. And we have that hide bidding jobs checkbox so that we can ensure that jobs that are currently in that status do not show up here for me to log purchases or hours to. This is essentially the same type of dropdown you see whenever you're logging time. And that's essentially the basics that I wanted to cover today, just to give you a better idea how some of the basic permissions work. Also, that extra level of tracking with our advanced permissions available with the enterprise package, and also some of the hide closed jobs. So I'd like to leave a little time here if you have any questions on anything that I covered, anything that I might not have covered, or even any of the other settings that you just want to learn a little bit more about. Essentially we can always keep time for other webinars to cover different features here. If you wanted a more detailed run through of any of the specifics here. So essentially anything that you're interested in learning more about, please feel free to submit in the chat or through our support team, and we're happy to give a more detailed demonstration of how it works.